how I am aware of Gilad is because of his work on the Java specification. But that's not all he's done. He's done magical other stuff. And he's also now working on the replacement for JavaScript. Is that a good way of saying it, or do you hate that description?
What I hate lots of things, but that's not
okay.
That's not what we're about.
Okay. Gilad is working on Dart, a new language with its own goals and its own magical wonderfulness.
You'll go far.
I'll go, okay. Anyway, so Gilad is going to talk about lots of wonderful things. I'm not quite sure quite how it's going to go, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew, for that introduction. It is your misfortune to be here today. I'm told that you are not programming language people. And so this is not a technical talk, really, because which makes it harder, because it's easy to give technical talks about stuff. It's harder to give these kind of high-level, hand-wavy things. And maybe you like it, or maybe not. The door is there. You all know Monty Python, of course, right? If you're not here, where, right? There's a sketch about shrubberies. And there's a guy who says he designs shrubberies. He's a shrubber. So I design programming languages, which is about the same. I actually do this for a living. There aren't too many people who do this for a living, especially in industry. I'm kind of lucky that way, and I therefore have perhaps a different perspective on these things than most people. And this is an attempt to give you some of that perspective, whether you want it or not. And so we'll start. Once upon a time, there were two Ludwigs. And first Ludwig built a house. This is Ludwig of Bavaria, who was reputedly perhaps slightly unhinged. But anyway, he built this nice fairy tale castle. And it has everything. It has turrets and towers and spires and arches and walls and big things. I'm not sure if it has flying buttresses, but it looks like it should if it doesn't, right? It should have a moat and a dungeon and things. And no matter how many things it has, it clearly could do with more, because at this point, right, the sky is not the limit. What does this have to do with programming languages? We'll see in a moment. Then there's Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, right, which is sort of, I think, as far as you can get from Ludwig's castle. This is the Barcelona Pavilion, in case you don't know. Built in 1929 originally and reconstructed in Barcelona sometime in the 90s, I think. Anyway, one of my favorite buildings, and it doesn't have much. It really basically has rectangles, right? This is from another perspective, and basically there's a whole bunch of rectangles in different materials, in different colors, in different textures, in different orientations, but it's a composition in rectangles, right? This is the same picture. Right, the aluminum pole here is the same one that's here, right? So it's from the side. See that wall that's next to the pool. You see the sort of side of it, right? It's very, very minimalist, and yet it's interesting. And doing minimalist things that are interesting is much, much harder than doing castles in the sky. Though castles in the sky are very hard to do as well. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of expertise, a lot of craftsmanship to produce Ludwig's castle. So my question to you is, which of these two programming languages do you prefer? You're cheating. You know about this stuff, right? So I know there's at least one programming language person here, and so she's already got it. So can now leave. For the rest of you, the point here is that I'm going to try and make the case for an analogy between art, in particular architecture is a good one, and programming languages. That is, there are probably people in this building who delude themselves that programming languages is somehow a science or something, or that it should be a science, or that it could be a science. And I've given up on that. In particular, it's more like an art than anything else. It's an applied art, right? It's not like painting or something that you just appreciate, you just look at it. It has to function, which makes things tedious, because then you have engineering. You actually have to make it work. But on the other hand, if it was just engineering, right, there are, in the Soviet Union, they had a lot of apartment blocks that represented architecture as engineering, right? People want more than that. People care about their programming languages. They are actually insanely attached and emotional and driven by these things. It's weird how people react to this. It's not weird, actually. I understand it completely, but it is, it's not a technical thing. This isn't just plumbing. And so architecture is a good metaphor because it combines all these issues. And as Andrew said, I once worked on Java for quite a while. That's probably why I'm here, in the sense that that's the work that sort of helped give me some sort of reputation. I don't know which reputation, but we won't get into that. And Java is like Ludwig's castle. It's enormously complicated. It's big. It takes enormous amounts of resources to build such a thing. And it also has a property that no matter how many things are already in it, you always need more things. And no matter how many things you'll add, you'll never have enough. And there are languages, the ones I really like, the ones that you don't get paid to work on, that are more like Barcelona Pavilion. And I'll try and convey that aesthetic in some way and give you some idea of how you might look at programming languages differently than most people. So there's an issue of novelty versus utility, right? In academia, novelty is terribly important because at the root of this science, new knowledge is what it's about. So if it's new, and as long as it is also true, that's very valuable. On its own merits, right? The science real science is not concerned with whether this stuff is useful or not. You never know what's going to be useful, right? Engineering, you start to worry about useful, and then it's not so critical. It's novel, it's nice, but it actually has to work. Tedious constraint that can make your life miserable at times. And in art, it's sort of mixed. Yes, novelty matters because people get bored. A lot of it is just fashion. On the other hand, there is really great art where it really gives you a different perspective. And so there's the kind of novelty that matters, where you get some insight. And all of this, again, applies to programming languages. But if you take the architecture metaphor again, you have to remember that novelty isn't enough. This is a hotel room I stayed in once. It's in Amsterdam. There's a hotel, it's called the Royal Hotel, and it's kind of an interesting place. Every room is different. They were all designed by different designers who have their own original ideas. My designer had the idea that this is the picture taken from the doorway to the hotel room. So in order to get through your room, you have to go through the bathroom. It is apparently novel. Whether this is actually a good idea, I'll let you judge, but novelty is not necessarily the only criteria you should have, right? For what it's worth. I actually told this to someone, and they told me that I think in New England, somewhere in the 18th or early 19th century, at some point when indoor plumbing was really a new idea, people actually engineered homes such that you could see the bathroom from the door because it was the hot new thing. And so it isn't even novel, it turns out. But anyway, novel, you want more than that. You want not only new, but you actually want things that actually make sense. So having argued that programming languages are this airy thing, that it's really more art than science, well, how do you evaluate these things? Basically, is it just a matter of subjective taste, or can you say something meaningful about how to evaluate these things? So, which brings us to the concept of the connoisseur, right? People who are knowledgeable, this word tends to be applied in areas where, again, knowledge is fuzzier. It isn't really science. There is knowledge, there's expertise, but it's a lot of taste, a lot of experience, a lot of other things like what's in fashion and who you know. But really the good part of this is some sort of an attempt to establish criteria of taste based on something more than, you know, I happen to like blue. So what does a connoisseur? A connoisseur is someone who should, you know, in art or something like that, right? They should know the history of the field. They should know all the masterpieces, and they should have some idea about principles of composition or symmetry or harmony or things like that. And they should know, you know, there's some ideology to this. Does you know, you see this work, and why is it important? Because yes, novelty mattered. It may have been the first one to look at the world in a certain way, but that was meaningful. It gave us a new idea. And this is very important in programming languages, because the programming language, we are sort of at the point of, you know, a great extinction in programming languages, in the sense that the world is sort of tending to standardize on a certain model, and these languages are everywhere, and we're losing diversity, just as we're losing diversity in lots of other places, but, you know, that's just the planet. It doesn't matter. There are many programming languages that most people are unaware of, different ways of thinking of things, different ways of looking at things that are really interesting, that are not part of the standard thing that most people programming in. And in a lot of departments, they're just giving in to pull from industry or whatever, and, you know, deciding to teach these things as introductory. I talked to one of your students yesterday, Zohar Melamed, I don't know if you remember him. And he said that in his first year, he was taught Miranda. Do you still teach Miranda or Haskell?
Haskell, yes.
First year?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So there's still hope. Right? There are a lot of schools where people are teaching Java, JavaScript, C, whatever, right? Things that are quite useful today and will be obsolete relics tomorrow. But that's because, you know, industry wants people who are trained in whatever thing they're using, flavor of the month. That's because actually there are faculty who want that, because they're doing something that isn't actually a programming language topic, and, you know, the tools of the trade are such, and they want people, you know, their students in the third year or so to be competent in that. And there's pressure to make it part of the curriculum. Why don't we, you know, at MIT they stopped teaching, you know, Scheme and started using Python, right? I don't view this as a good thing, right? The standardization certainly has some industrial benefits, but it's a real loss. So we'll try and discourse on this, and of course there's pitfalls to talking about this, right? So you'll see a lot of quotes in this talk. Here's one of my favorites. Right, it's easy to criticize. It's easy to go and say, you know, take whatever your big industrial language is, Java or C#, to point at flaws and problems. Try doing it for a while and living within those constraints, and you'll find that, you know, it's rather complicated, and the people who are doing this, present company accepted, are actually rather good at this. And in a way, it's like Hollywood movies, if you want another art analogy, right? You know, if you're sort of sophisticated, you know, person of fine taste, yeah, independent film, you know, all this European cinema, they're great. Hollywood, yeah, just crap for the man. You know, it's easy to criticize this, but the professionalism of the people who work in Hollywood, they are absolutely first rate, right? The actual constraints on producing the stuff to that quality on that time are harder than the ones in independent film, right? They don't have maybe the freedom. They're constrained by a market, by all kinds of things, but these people are first rate. It isn't easy to build Ludwig's castle, even if you don't like the result. There are other pitfalls, like this is a battle I can't win. This is a quote from Alan Perlis. In fact, there's a whole site of quotes from Alan Perlis. He was a famous computer science professor at Yale and Carnegie Mellon, and, you know, he's been dead for some years now. He was actually my thesis advisor's advisor, so, you know, I can claim some reflected photons of glory. And so lots of wonderful quotes. This is a quote he delivered at a talk to some group of APLers. We'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, right, this sentiment is, while some of us may have it, it is not an effective means of communication. Generally, I have found that you can learn from my experience here, addressing people as jackasses tends to undermine your message. They seem less receptive than they should be. Perhaps because they are, or perhaps for other reasons. But generally, you need to find a better way of communicating the sentiment, and generally, it is very hard, right? It's very, very hard to convince people of these points. Believe me, I spend a lot of my time doing it, and so this is, in some sense, a futile thing, and I'm aware of that, but I'm going to try anyway. And of course, you can easily get into philosophizing, as you probably notice, and think Derrida or something. So despite all these things, I'll brave on, and I'm going to start talking about actual programming language matters, syntax. Everybody cares about syntax. Sadly, most people, that's all they care about, right? It's all about syntax, but it isn't. Nevertheless, right, people do that. A good point of reference is Parkinson's Law of Triviality. How many people have read Parkinson's Law or even aware of it? I ask people, I find this amazing. This is one of the great books of the 20th century. So Parkinson was an English, I don't know what he actually did, but he was I think a professor or something here in Britain, or sometimes back in the 50s he was out in Malaysia, all kinds of places. But he wrote these studies on bureaucracy, and Parkinson's Law says that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. That is the basic law. As many graduate students here, you should know that. In fact, you usually work with the inverse. That is, your professors know that by giving you less time to do your work, you can compress it and do more work. So anyway, it's a wonderful study of all kinds of bureaucratic interactions, and there are many corollaries, and one of them is the law of triviality, stated here in its original form. You may have heard of the bike shedding problem. That's a phrase people are more aware of, at least in the US, which comes from the same thing. There's a segment in his book, basically. There's a committee, it's deciding on a nuclear power plant. Big, complicated issue, there are billions of pounds at stake, etc. And, who knows, environmental studies, geology, terrorists, engineering, lots of complicated issues. So basically, everyone's already decided what they're going to do anyway. They vote, and this doesn't take very much time. At the end, there's a small item on the agenda that, in the interest of being green and whatever, employees should be encouraged to bike to the plant. And so there's going to be a bike shed. And the question is, what color should it be? Now, this is something everybody can have an opinion about. You don't need to be a nuclear engineer. You don't need to do, environmental impact studies. So they spend most of their time discussing that. And this is how the real world works, unfortunately. And the analogy with programming languages is exactly the same. Everybody talks about syntax because most people haven't a clue. And so they can talk about the syntax because that's what they see. And as a species, we've evolved that way, right? Remote sensing is important. We don't have the time or resources to do in-depth evaluation of every situation. So you kind of take a look, and you're evolved to make a quick assessment. And what has taken millions of years of evolution actually works fairly well, but we haven't evolved to evaluate programming languages, and so this strategy doesn't work nearly as well. But nevertheless, there are some principles you can apply. Because when people say, look at syntax, they say, oh, it looks ugly, it hurts my eyes, whatever. It's inane. So what can we say? I'm going to give you a concrete example here. BNF is a notation, if you're a programming language person, it's a notation for expressing the syntax of programming languages. But it itself is a notation. It itself is a syntax. And in most languages, you probably know there's a rule. Identifiers, typically they start with a letter, and then after that there can be other letters or digits. And this is what this thing is telling us, right? That an identifier is, by definition, a letter followed by either a letter or a digit. The star means 0 or more times. It's a very concise notation, works very well. Now if you take a random programming language, you can express this in a slightly less perfect form, but pretty close. And if you use sort of standard notation, you find that it's a little more verbose. And the point I want, but it's really saying the same thing in different notation. So why is this a nice notation? And why is this an ugly notation? So is there something we can say that's more principled that, oh, it makes my eyes bleed? And why is, the one in the middle here, why is that one the best? So, if you look here, the stuff that is red is completely extraneous. So this guy doesn't have anything extraneous. It's all about the problem you're trying to solve. It's all about the issue, expressing the solution, the rules that govern how this identifier looks, right? Deliberately a trivial example, right? On the other hand, if you look at the newspeak example, it's very similar, but we've got this guy. I don't know how well this shows up on, hopefully you guys can see it, yeah. Right? We don't have postfix operators, so it says star, so it's a little more verbose. Do the same thing. Yeah, I don't know, you can do something with the lights or something.
I don't know if the blinds
Out of your way. Yeah, oh, that's worse than I thought. That's good. Yeah, you can do more of that than oop.
Can you also do it for the blinds, the lower ones?
Yay. And happily all of this is being recorded for posterity.
We can just cut. We'll have an edit.
I
I'm
don't
gonna
think
direct
I
this
can
Nothing there. All there. Anyway, maybe now you can sort of see the purple prose better.